What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another Fantasy Football video. Today, we got a good one for you guys. In today's video, we're going to be going over the must-own wide receivers in the later rounds. With it now being August and fantasy drafts taking place, let's be real, right now. So the players listed in this video aren't going to be shockingly new. These are players that we've loved throughout this entire offseason, players that throughout training camp have even risen in our rankings, and overall we are confident in these players as solid picks where they're going in drafts. Before we do get into the video though, just a quick reminder that if you do enjoy the videos we're putting out, the best way to show your support is by hitting that like button. It helps us grow the channel, and as you know, we're on the road to 100k subscribers. Our goal is to hit that by the start of the NFL season, and with your help we can make that happen. So if you enjoy, hit that like button, and if you're new, maybe you haven't yet subscribed, consider taking today as an opportunity to do so. Also, guys, be advised our draft packages are available now. So hey, maybe you put off some of your draft research, or maybe you want to take your fantasy game to the next level. Our draft package is exactly what you're looking for. You'll gain access to our tier-based rankings, our risk ratings, player projections, video player breakdowns on the top 150 players, our sleepers, targets, busts, access to our private Discord community group, and more. So if that interests you, once again, that's at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link, as always, in the description box below. With that being said, it's time to hop over to our stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was among quarterbacks with at least 20 pass attempts in a single game last season, which player had the best game in terms of yards per attempt? The correct answer was actually Tom Brady. Congratulations to Connor McLeod, the first to get this right on YouTube. And as for Twitter, at BenDove254-80510. Once again, congratulations to both of you. But as for today's stat of the day, which player was the oldest wide receiver to have at least 35 fantasy points in a single game last season? Once again, that's which wide receiver was the oldest player to have at least 35 fantasy points in a single game last season. Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Alright guys, without further ado, it's time to hop right into the video, and as per usual, we'll begin with the player listed on the thumbnail. This actually, out of all players on this list, is probably going to be the most intriguing, most surprising. A player that we haven't brought up a whole ton throughout this offseason, but definitely somebody you can snag in the later rounds to bring a ton of value to your wide receiver room. The player we're talking about, of course, is Emmanuel Sanders of the Buffalo Bills. Emmanuel Sanders is currently coming off the board as the 63rd wide receiver, meaning for all of you guys out there, there is a 100% chance that you are able to get Emmanuel Sanders so long as you target him early enough. Don't get us wrong, we're not sitting here and telling you need to reach several rounds in order to get him, but with a player who's coming off the board in the same range as a kicker and a defense, it means that if you do agree with our take and if you do like Emmanuel Sanders, all you have to do is invest one of your double-digit round picks into Emmanuel Sanders in order to guarantee that you get him on your roster. Why exactly do we like Emmanuel Sanders though? It's for a few reasons. First off, this Buffalo Bills offense is one that we definitely want to target players on, especially on the receiving end. Josh Allen, leading this team from the quarterback position, is producing a very fantasy-friendly situation for all receivers on this team. Emmanuel Sanders is now slated and projected to be the second highest targeted receiver in this passing offense, and if that holds true, where he's going in drafts means he's massively undervalued. I don't think many people out there are questioning how fruitful the second highest targeted receiver position on the Buffalo Bills is, so the only real question that you guys would have to have regarding Emmanuel Sanders is how sure in fact can we be that he has exactly locked down that role behind Stephon Diggs? Well, the reality is, me being a person who was really high on Gabriel Davis, especially to start the offseason and all through training camp, I've really wanted Gabriel Davis to be that guy. He showed flashes last season where he showed off his big play ability, he was targeted when plays broke down, and even as an individual contributor, there was a lot there to love. Well, unfortunately, the first warning sign was the fact that the Buffalo Bills did sign Emmanuel Sanders to a one-year deal worth $6 million, but the most important part is that all $6 million of that is fully guaranteed. That means for this 1 year, they definitely want to use him and have intentions of using him, but on top of that, the fact that they offered him such a fruitful contract in what was a difficult year for free agent moves, especially at the wide receiver position, for a team that was vocal even in previous years about wanting to get Emmanuel Sanders on the roster, them offering him such a high contract, presumably well above market price, it just shows how much the team is already committed into Emmanuel Sanders, and the guaranteed money really speaks for itself. There's a saying in the NFL, it's called follow the money, and with Emmanuel Sanders, that's definitely what we're doing here, but it doesn't just end there. As soon as training camp began, you could find Emmanuel Sanders running with the first team offense, and for those of us out there that were looking forward to seeing Gabriel Davis potentially work in and rotate with the ones, that was something we just didn't see as long as Emmanuel Sanders was on the field. In fact, Gabriel Davis wasn't able to rotate in with the first team offense until Emmanuel Sanders took a day off. So if we compile all three factors of the coaching staff absolutely loving Emmanuel Sanders and wanting to target him over the past several seasons, then throw in the fact that they offered him a $6 million fully guaranteed contract in what was a bad year for free agent wide receivers, and to take it all home, Emmanuel Sanders, as soon as he got onto the field, is running with the ones, and his position in that offense has been safe and secure this entire training camp. With Emmanuel Sanders being a wide receiver that's coming off the board outside the top 60, we think this is incredible value. I mean, realistically, he's going to be your wide receiver 6. So for us, if you're looking for late round wide receivers that could potentially be league winners, Emmanuel Sanders, he's definitely up there at the top of the board. Well guys, if you thought that Emmanuel Sanders coming off the board as the wide receiver 63 was going to be the latest wide receiver you could find on this list, well, you're sadly mistaken. The next wide receiver we have is coming off the board as the wide receiver 68. It's Jakobi Meyers of the New England Patriots. If you followed the channel for the past couple seasons, you know that Jakobi Meyers has been a player we've been pretty high on, and I'm not sitting here and saying he's the perfect pick and that his situation is guaranteed to hit. No, it's quite the opposite in fact, but again, he's coming off the board as the wide receiver 68. It's not going to cost you virtually anything to get him on your roster. This is the type of player you can get with one of your last picks, if not your last pick, and for the type of upside that he could bring to your team if he in fact hits, leading me time and time again to select Jakobi Meyers in the later rounds at the wide receiver positions whenever I'm on the clock. It's a high upside, low risk investment that's virtually free, one of the types of players that you're not going to have to hold on to for the entire season to wait and see if he pans out. This is the type of player that you can grab, you can draft, and within the first 3 or 4 weeks, we'll have a good understanding of whether Jakobi Meyers actually is going to be a player we should roster, if he has that upside to be a top 20 player at the position, or maybe at that point we consider dropping Jakobi Meyers for a player with more upside we could grab off the waiver wire. And to go a little further in depth with that, when it comes to drafting late round picks, we're always trying to draft players with upside in mind. We want players that have the ability to potentially crack our starting lineup, and when it comes to many of the players that are being drafted in the later rounds, we know right off the get-go that we are not expecting them to post starter level production immediately right out of the gate. We know some of them need to develop into their situation, their roles need to expand over time, so for many players that are being drafted in the later rounds, regardless of what production we see from them at the beginning portion of the season, many of them will be held on to and remain on players' benches regardless of the points that they put up or lack thereof, because the hopes is and the expectation is that as the season progresses, their role could increase, they could put up more fantasy points, and we don't want to drop them before that happens, because our worst nightmare would be that immediately after we drop them and another team picks them up, they produce the points that we were hoping they would produce when we drafted them in the first place. Oftentimes this leads to numerous players sitting on our benches, causing us to either miss out on players we should be taking off the waiver wire, or be forced to drop other players that we otherwise wouldn't or shouldn't due to simply being so limited on options. When it comes to a player like Jakobi Meyers, his role and the expectation for him is to be the leading receiver for the New England Patriots. We should know right away within the first few weeks whether Jakobi Meyers is going to be what we were expecting and what we were hoping for, what we got glimpses of at portions last season, or whether he is a player that we can drop for the hottest thing on the waiver wire that hopefully can be that upside player to crack our starting lineup in the future. To circle back real quick on the glimpses that we saw from Jakobi Meyers last season to give you guys an idea of the type of upside we could expect if he does in fact hit, we had a 4-game sample and a 4-game stretch last season where Jakobi Meyers was heavily targeted as the main receiver in this offense, and through that span he averaged 8 targets per game, converting that into 7 receptions per game, showing off his ability to have a very positive catch rate if targeted in that position. He converted those 7 receptions into 87 receiving yards per game, so he was averaging over 15 fantasy points per game through that 4-game stretch. And I know a 4-game sample isn't exactly massive here, but it's 1/4 of an entire season, and that's what Jakobi Meyers was able to do consecutively, 4 games back to back to back. And what that tells us is that when his number was called, if given the targets, Jakobi Meyers stepped up and he produced. So that's why I feel strongly that if thrust in the position to be the leading receiver on this team yet again for the 2021 season, Jakobi Meyers is the type of player to step up and make that happen. With him coming off the board as the wide receiver 68, I think that's an extremely low risk risk investment that I'm willing to make time and time again. We definitely recommend you do as well. If it doesn't work out, just drop him. It's not costing you anything. But let's move on to the next player, which is one I know you're all super familiar with. It's Russell Gage of the Atlanta Falcons. Out of all players on this list, I believe Russell Gage is going to be the one that most of us are going to be in consensus with, because if you look at Russell Gage's overall situation, it's a no-brainer pick that Russell Gage is a slam dunk in the later rounds. Right off the bat though, I will let you know that he is not as cheap as the other wide receivers. He's currently coming off the board as the wide receiver 53, but come on guys, this is still going to be the receiver you draft as your 5th wide receiver off the board, and I wouldn't be surprised if Russell Gage could crack your starting lineup as early as the first few weeks of the season. Russell Gage, in fact, finished last season as the wide receiver 37. That was in an offense, of course, where Julio Jones was still on the roster, but looking at Russell Gage as an individual, this is a player who's coming into his 4th year and has been improving in nearly every measurable category in each season since being drafted. Russell Gage was drafted in the 2018 season, where he did appear in 15 games and was available to start, but only received 10 targets across the season. His sophomore campaign, though, in 2019 is where we really started to recognize his name. In that season, he had 74 targets, caught 49 of them, put up nearly 450 receiving yards, and even caught his first receiving touchdown. Many of us familiarized ourselves with Russell Gage that season, but we weren't sure exactly where he could step up in the offense. But with Julio Jones sidelined for many portions of last year, Russell Gage was the clear 3rd option in this passing offense and put up a pretty darn respectable season, receiving 110 targets, catching 72 of them, putting up 786 receiving yards, and even scored 4 different times. Like I had mentioned, that strong performance led him to finish as the wide receiver 37 in PPR leagues. His performance also led us all to believe that he was going to be the receiver to pick up most of the slack left behind by Julio Jones, who is no longer an Atlanta Falcon. He was traded to the Tennessee Titans. One thing that we do know for sure though is that now that with Julio Jones gone, whichever player does ultimately end up stepping in and being that receiver to finish 2nd on this team in targets behind Calvin Ridley, whichever player that is going to be really solid for fantasy. The reason why this role is so coveted on this Atlanta Falcons offense is because it's always going to be one of the teams near the league leaders when it comes to passing volume. Reason being is that the Atlanta Falcons are the epitome of a high volume passing team. They have everything you're looking for in a high passing volume team. They have the poor defense. Couple that in with a pure pocket passing quarterback that's not going to use his mobility to get rushing yards on the ground, meaning if the ball is moving downfield by the quarterback, it's going to be through the air. So we have the poor defense, we have the pure pocket passing quarterback, then you have to tie in the fact that they have a poor run game, meaning the odds are if they're able to move the ball with any sort of success, it's going to be through the air. So when you take into consideration all of those factors, it's no wonder why the Atlanta Falcons each and every year rank within the top 10 when it comes to passing volume. So when it comes to Russell Gage for this season, he was a player to finish last year with 110 targets. Julio Jones is now no longer on the roster, a player that commanded 150 plus targets per season. And if you guys have been following any reports out of camp or have been following the trending tab on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com, where we post all of the top training camp news and notes and the fantasy impact that it has and our take on it, we've already reported out on Russell Gage, who looks like a stud in camp and is the clear favorite target at the wide receiver position behind Calvin Ridley. In 2 wide receiver sets, Russell Gage, he's the guy on the field. So with him coming off the board outside the top 50 and already having finished as the wide receiver 37 last season, I think this is a no-brainer slam dunk pick, the one that I think most of us are going to be in consensus on. But with this being the must-own late round wide receivers, we are including the best picks that we believe in the later rounds, and Russell Gage to me certainly is one of those players. Alright guys, we're moving into the final player we have on this list. It's Marvin Jones of the Jacksonville Jaguars, who currently is coming off the board as the wide receiver 57. Pretty crazy to think that all of the wide receivers in today's video are pretty close in ADP. We have Russell Gage as the wide receiver 51. Coming next in ADP, you have Marvin Jones as the wide receiver 57. Then after that, we have Emmanuel Sanders at wide receiver 63, and then to round out the 4 on this list, you have Jakobi Meyers at the wide receiver 68. So the total range is from wide receiver 53 to wide receiver 68. So I strongly believe that anybody heading into their draft with this list of 4 players heading into the later rounds should have a really solid chance at drafting at least one of these players if you set your mind to it. Circling back to Marvin Jones specifically though, this is a player that highlighted a recent short of ours, but unfortunately with those shorts, they're only 1 minute long. We have to jam pack as much information we can in a 1-minute format. But if you want to check that out, there's really good information on that. Just to reiterate, Marvin Jones joins a team, the Jacksonville Jaguars, that does have a pretty crowded wide receiver room. The wide receivers that Marvin Jones will be competing for targets with are arguably much more talented than him. I would agree, at least at this stage of their careers. You have Laviska Shenault and DJ Chark, two very talented and very athletic wide receivers, and two players we're also fans of targeting in the earlier stages of the draft. Now, obviously, if you are entering the late stages of your draft and you already own Laviska Shenault or DJ Chark, I wouldn't suggest drafting Marvin Jones. Part of the reason why it's so appealing to draft Marvin Jones is because we are attempting to get a piece of this Jacksonville Jaguars passing offense. Marvin Jones being the cheapest option out of the three receivers is definitely a fact working in his favor, but if you do end up owning one of them by the time you enter the late stages of the draft, you definitely don't want to double down by drafting Marvin Jones in addition to one of those others. You might be asking yourself why we want a piece of this Jacksonville Jaguars passing offense. Well, for starters, it's much like the Atlanta Falcons, in which we can expect high passing volume, positive game scripts. It's a team that itself is coming off a season in which it finished 6th in passing volume, followed by the season before that in which it finished 12th. And when you factor in that the defense is unlikely to be much improved, but they did get a massive upgrade at the quarterback position, so you're taking a team that's yet again going to be a high passing volume offense, but it's also going to be a team taking a major step forward in the area of efficiency. This means areas like touchdown rate, catchable target percentage, these are going to be much higher than in seasons past, and we've already seen that when it comes to the Jacksonville Jaguars, it's a team that already can support numerous fantasy relevant wide receivers. Now, when it comes to Marvin Jones, he is going to be a free agent wide receiver, a new addition to this team, but that's not really going to be working against him. Typically, a free agent wide receiver entering a new team with competition for targets would be at a disadvantage because the quarterback would likely already have his favorite target and pre-established tendencies when distributing all the targets amongst this passing offense. But Trevor Lawrence is a new quarterback for this team. He has no predetermined chemistry or pre-built connection with any wide receiver on this team. So Marvin Jones being a free agent, but one that is more of a veteran, he actually has experience in transitioning to a new team, a new offense, which is going to work in his favor and be an advantage that he has over the other young wide receivers in this offense. In fact, we've already seen from early reports out of camp that Marvin Jones has been looking like the favorite target. And while that's not all that surprising in the early portion of camp and likely to hold true for the early part of the season, if you ask me, I would think that the first 4 weeks are going to be Marvin Jones' best chance at leading this team from the wide receiver position. Obviously, as time goes on, I believe that the youth and the talent will prevail, and aging wide receivers, we see the season take a toll on them as it progresses. But that's not to say that Marvin Jones can't overcome that. He's always been the type of player to exceed expectations and be undervalued in drafts. He's also the type of player to finish as a top 30 wide receiver in 3 of the past 4 seasons. So even at age 31, I wouldn't completely rule him out, and all of the reports that we've had so far out of camp have been praising Marvin Jones to the highest regard. He's currently coming off the board as the wide receiver 57. We have him ranked as the wide receiver 46, so definitely a player that you can extract a ton of value from at the later stages of your draft, so it should come as absolutely no surprise why Marvin Jones made this list. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.